My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
My name is Beef Pork Ribs. I'm a fine repository of esoteric knowledge, which I suppose most people would qualify as geeky. Though I dabble in many fandoms, my main areas of expertise are anime, movies, and Belgian comics, with a strong recent insurgency of D&D.
Our mission is to bring nerd and geek culture to the masses
by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, comics, graphic novels, TV, cartoons, animation, nerds are geeks, entertainment culture. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Pound. Nerds and geeks come gather around the scene. Come and join us in the Bat Jar. Come and tune into Average Joe and DC. Lots of room here in the Bat Jar. When the newest nerdy news drops, these pals flip it under the scope. DC, Marvel, Disney, Star Wars, cinematic, multiverses, Mega Christmas, Strangest franchise. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd and geek culture under the microscope.
And we do it over and over again. That was a comment on how many Marvel shows there are now. That's as much as I'm making a commentary in this opening remark. I hadn't thought of something clever.
Well, Beeper, you really wanted to make a comment on my age for this episode, so go ahead and
You're
put it out there.
Absolutely correct. As of the recording, and when this is wait, is this one the one coming out tomorrow?
By the time people are listening to this, it's already tomorrow.
Yes,
which is January 3rd.
Which means that both as of the time of this recording and as of the time it comes out, I can mock you for being an old man, for being so ancient that a third of your life is likely gone.
Yes, so for people who don't know, I had my 30th birthday last week, and Beef Pork Ribs my birthday is like pretty much at the very end of the calendar year, and Beeper, your birthday is at the start of the calendar year, and we were born only like 5 days apart, but I'm technically a year older than you.
Yeah, some people... But, people have been really weird about technicalities because of the whole Betty White situation. So, maybe we are the same age. Who knows? Because there is less than 17 days between us. So, yeah, depending on how many leap years we end up living, we would be the same age.
But for these, there's this hallowed 5 days of the year where I'm older than you are, and that's why you feel free to call me old now.
Yes, you are indeed very old. You're ancient. I can't believe you're like the Crypt Keeper, to make a reference to Freaky Friday. Slash, the Crypt Keeper. You should talk like the Crypt Keeper for the rest of the episode. That would be tremendous. But I don't think
I'm old. I beg your pardon. I'm like the Crypt Keeper.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say you should talk like Jamie Lee Curtis talking as a teenager for the rest of the episode. And I think that's a much funnier idea.
Like, I can try, but it'll die off pretty fast here. But, eager listeners will notice Mljonir's voice there. Mljonir, we haven't seen you a little bit now. I know you've been obviously busy, but it's good to have you back.
Hi, nice to be back. Yeah, it's mostly been because the way things line up, I'm normally taking care of the baby around this time, but she's sleeping right now. So we'll kind of see if I need to rush off with her or if she comes to join us or what happens. But we watched, Beef Pork Ribs and I watched Hawkeye together, so I was like, if I'm available, I'd be happy to talk about it.
Nice. Jam has been on the show a couple times now, and we love her and appreciate her, and she's the official, in my heart, she's definitely one of our mascots alongside the Bat Jar itself.
I appreciate that.
But, having a baby's one thing, but what's something nerdy or geeky you've been up to since you were last on the show?
Let me think. I'll have this. Yeah, Beef Pork Ribs and I fell down a rabbit hole on YouTube. We watched a video called "What the Internet Did to Undertale," and then I was like, I don't know anything about Undertale. So then we watched Jacksepticeye play through all of Undertale twice, Pacifist Run and Genocide Run. So that was fun. Now I know what Undertale is, and I love it.
Okay, well, hopefully we have some Undertale fans who will email us asking us to do an episode on it.
It's yeah, if so, maybe I'll join it. It's fun. I have this terrible habit of getting into fandoms for games that I've never played because I'm not really a gamer, but there's some games out there with some really fun lore and characters. And so I just watch Jacksepticeye play them, and then I'm like, yeah, I'm in this fandom now. It's fine.
Well, this podcast is very special. It's basically a double date because we have a new guest, somebody who has never been on the show before, my fabled girlfriend that I've spoken about a few times. So let's welcome Tater Tot to the Bat Jar podcast.
Hi, friends.
Woo. You know, fabled usually mean doesn't actually exist or is based on a myth, as Conker demonstrated when talking about the Panther King.
I promise I'm real.
Yes, listeners of the show might not believe that Average Joe has a girlfriend. So can you just say that for posterity's sake, for let the internet know?
My name
I
is
think
Tater
it's-
Tot, and I'm Average Joe's girlfriend.
You know, is this your girlfriend up in Canada? That
Yes.
joke is less sting if you're not American.
So Tater Tot, I know you well, but our listeners don't, and we always ask new guests the same two questions. We've been coaching you to prepare you for this. So, what kind of nerd or geek are you?
Yes. So I was debriefed earlier today on the differences between nerd and geek, so I think I'm ready to answer this question. I would say that I am more of a geek than a nerd, and especially when it comes to book series. I'm a huge Harry Potter fan. I've been big into like the John Green books. I most recently got into the Percy Jackson series. I binge read the first 5, like the Percy Jackson books, and I'm now on to the Heroes of Olympus series. Was reading that actually just before the podcast started. So that's kind of my niche, I would say.
So fantasy books.
Fantasy books, yeah.
Okay. And what kind of nerd or geek would you want to be?
I think I'm content with where I'm at. I just found the Percy Jackson series, so it feels like I've kind of found a new area in books to read, and I'm feeling pretty good.
But I have a huge list of things I want to introduce you to. You sure you don't have any room to grow?
I mean, I'm always open to try new things.
Okay. The internet, you heard that. We'll check in later down the road, see what happens.
You should try doing. I recently found this YouTube series, and it was this guy, who just records his wife who doesn't play games playing games to have like a non-gamer approach of it. So I don't know. She might be a more Asian John-ish point of view on the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about anime the other day when we were over at a friend's place for New Year's because they both watched it, and I would be full Asian John in that category.
Well, luckily, we're not here to talk about anime today. We are here to talk about the Hawkeye series that just wrapped up on Disney Plus. This is now the 4th live-action MCU series, 5th if you include What If, that has aired on Disney Plus. But as always, like we've never really had Hawkeye be the focus of a conversation before. So we'll do our secret origin segments where we share how we were first introduced to the topic of today's episode. In this case, we're talking about the Hawkeye character. So Mljonir, let's start with you. How were you first introduced to Hawkeye?
The first time I remember really being aware of Hawkeye as a character was in the Avengers Assemble cartoon, which has like such a bop of a theme song. It's so good, and it's a really fun little cartoon. And in that, Hawkeye's a lot more like his comic book counterpart. He is kind of a sassy loner who's so afraid of not being good enough for everyone that he pushes people away, instead of admitting he wants to be one of the group, which is such a fun character trope. And then I really liked him in that, and then I got into him in the comics. I'm actually a pretty big Hawkeye fan. I love Hawkeye. I know that probably sounds weird for people who only know him from the movies, because I know he has not been as popular in the movies, and he's actually like a joke, pathetic character to like a lot of like casual Marvel fans. But people who do read the comics more, he is a pretty popular character, and I think he's a very great, well-written character and has a lot going for him. So I've been super excited about this series for a long, long time, and I've been like hoping they would make a Hawkeye movie, and was like super hyped when they announced the TV show was happening.
Is that Avenger show you're talking about? Is that the one where the theme song's like "Forever Fight as One"?
Yeah, that one.
Okay, yeah, that's a good one. Well, let's keep the ladies first thing going. Tater Tot, how were you first introduced to Hawkeye?
Yeah, definitely more of a casual fan when it comes to Marvel and such. So the first time I saw Hawkeye was watching the Avengers.
Not even Thor, where he has a cameo?
I haven't seen that movie.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. I had to gasp. Yeah, the first time I saw it was Avengers, and we watched it at the drive-in back home. And so one of my friends was a big Marvel fan, and he was explaining to us in the car all of the characters, like, oh, this is Captain America, this is Iron Man, blah, blah, blah. This is Hawkeye. And so there was 3 of us, 1 guy and 2 girls in the car, and we both heard Hot Guy. And that's what he's been affectionately known as in my heart ever since. But I do love him. He's actually, Captain America is my #1 favorite superhero, and then Hawkeye is actually second. Oh, hi, baby.
She agrees, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, Hawkeye's my second, because he's just a pure character. Like, I mean, sure, he's got that, like, off the rails and the blip thing, but yeah, he's just like a guy who wants to provide for his family and do the right thing, and yeah, I like that aspect of his character.
So you really know nothing of Hawkeye outside of the Marvel Cinematic Universe?
Absolutely nothing.
Okay. That'll be helpful for our conversation later. Beeper, how were you introduced to the hot guy?
Yep. I guess Thor, because I can't think. Like, I read a few Marvel comics when I was a kid, but Hawkeye is definitely not in Secret Wars, because like that would make absolute. Yeah, he would. Like, Spider-Man was barely strong enough to survive that kind of thing. So having Hawkeye there would feel really strange. So I guess, yeah, probably, yeah, his cameo in Thor, and then how he was. And I because I'm married to Mjolnir, I did get to read the first issue of My Life as a Weapon, which she forgot to mention and wants to talk about now. But mostly, yeah, I read that one comic, and other than that, I know Hawkeye from the movies.
Yeah, which that comic is really good and is kind of considered the quintessential, like, Hawkeye, like, boiling down of what is great about Hawkeye in that comic. And this show we're going to talk about is based very heavily on that comic series by Matt Fraction. Although they did what they could, but something really interesting, I guess, is that they made some weird choices with Hawkeye in the movies, including the fact that they made him a family man, and they've done good things with it. Like, they've done interesting things with the character, but he's always been kind of a perpetual, pathetic bachelor in the comics. It's like a pretty big part of his character. And that's a pretty big part of the My Life as a Weapon character arc and things that happen too. So it's really interesting, like, for me, for someone who's very involved with I don't know, the Hawkeye fandom, in comics to kind of, it's been really interesting seeing how he's been portrayed and like recreated, I guess, in the MCU, and the really different places they've gone with him while still trying to like keep the core of the character.
Yeah, we're going to talk about My Life as a Weapon because I think this we've got an interesting cross section of experiences of Hawkeye here. Because like for myself, I watched this Iron Man animated series from the 90s, and Hawkeye was like a supporting character in that because in that show, Iron Man led a group called Force Works, which sounded like just basically like a discount Avengers group. And Hawkeye was there, and he's a guy who's wearing all purple. He's got this like pointy mask hat thing on. He's shooting arrows, and everyone else is like doing superhero stuff, and he seemed kind of lame. And you know, you guys have mentioned him being kind of perceived as a bit of a joke character, and admittedly, in a world of superheroes, if your whole thing is that you shoot a bow and arrow, you do kind of stick out as being a little antiquated. So that's how I was introduced to Hawkeye, and then like Mjolnir, I watched the Avengers show that he's portrayed much better, and he still looks the same. Still has the same purple outfit with the pointy mask, but he was more interesting to watch there.
I just feel the need to point out that, you know, Green Arrow is not ridiculed at the same level and is definitely a lot weaker than the average hero in the DC canon. So I don't know if it's necessarily, I think it's a character choice that, because, you know, and I think that is something that Mjolnir kind of touched on, but that is kind of a core part of Hawkeye's character, is that it's not so much that he feels antiquated, but that other people make him feel like that, or that, like, it's not that he's useless, it's that he feels like he should be better himself rather than being satisfied with kind of what he brings to the team.
He has a bad habit of comparing himself to people with godlike powers, which is just not a fair like thing to do at all. And he is better than most normal humans, like way better, like a, you know, way more than above average. But when you compare that to people who are just okay at being superhuman, you know, you're gonna have some confidence issues.
Yeah, I mean, Green Arrow really separates himself from other characters because they wrote his character to be like this social justice warrior at a time in the 70s when no other superheroes were really doing that. So I think what's helped him kind of maintain popularity is like they defined his character like outside of his abilities. And then I love Arrow, the show. I watched that thing all the way through, and it was basically a Batman show, but they just used Green Arrow, who's like a different billionaire playboy superhero instead of Batman. And so that certainly helped in his favor as well.
Well, yeah, I think that is part of the big difference between those two characters, is that Green Arrow is kind of a Batman, you know, ripoff. He's this, you know, billionaire who decided to put his money to good use and make like themed tech, and also he's good at shooting things or whatever. And he also is quite a very confident person from what I've seen. I'm not as familiar with him.
I mean, he's
as
also
Hawkeye, but Hawkeye is like an orphan who grew up in a circus and has a criminal past and then wanted to do good despite his like really like crappy upbringing, and his personal life is always a mess. Like I said, he's a perpetual bachelor. He can't keep a relationship going. He can barely keep himself alive because he always throws himself into like dangerous situations that are way outside of his like just like mortality zone. And he in the comics, what it is that he has that overconfidence thing where he's trying to make up for feeling like a failure. But it's pretty obvious that's what he's doing. Whereas I don't know if maybe Green Arrow has some of those issues too, but if he does, he's much better at hiding it. Like, he feels more confident of a character than Hawkeye does, because when Hawkeye's being very braggadocio, it feels false.
And to be fair, he also had a big kick in popularity by being the audience insert for Justice League Unlimited, which was a great and very popular show.
Anyway, I could talk about Green Arrow forever, so we're gonna transition just a bit of the secret origin for the actual Hawkeye character. He first appeared in Tales of Suspense issue 57 in September 1964 as an Iron Man villain. Both him and Black Widow made their debut in the comics originally as Iron Man villains before transitioning like a year after that into the Avengers. So Tater Tot, just as somebody who, again, doesn't know comics, doesn't know Hawkeye outside of the MCU, is it surprising to you to hear that he started as a villain?
Oh, totally. I was like, this sweet little boy, he's a villain. Both him and Black Widow. I mean, I guess I can understand Black Widow, her origin a little bit more from, like, unless it's totally different than in the movie that came out. But yeah, that he was a villain to start out with is very shocking, because my only understanding is that, yeah, he is a hero.
Yeah, in the comics, in the normal 616 continuity, he's a lot less of a I'm just a soldier here to do my job. Like, it's a very weird thing that the MCU did, which I think is partly based on what his character was in the Ultimate Universe, which is a different continuity. But he's not like that, like this, my life is being a SHIELD agent and all that stuff, like he kind of seems to be in the MCU. Like, he kind of gets recruited-ish into SHIELD at some point, I think, but he's always like, one of his main things is he has a problem with authority, like, to a fault, and hates being told what to do. They explore that really well in the Avengers Assemble cartoon, actually, I think. And so it's kind of interesting. In the comics, he was like a criminal and then an Avenger, and then sometimes he'd help out with some of that government stuff, and they just skim over a lot of that in the MCU, which I think makes him less interesting, and I think it's kind of sad. But I do like that they kept his relationship with Black Widow, because he and Black Widow, like Average Joe just said, have been like interlinked and very important parts of each other's character and continuity from the very beginning.
I think another thing also, if you're a comic fan, you kind of have a bit more the idea that Iron Man has a lot of villains that aren't so superhero-ish. Like, his position in Marvel since the MCU has kind of been slightly changed in the comics as well, but he used to be just a guy in a suit who mostly had enemies who were normal people as well, unless he was with the Avengers.
Which they do capture a little bit in the movies. Like, most of his villains are a guy in another suit.
Well, let's start talking about the new series itself. So, like everything else that's happened in Phase 4, the Hawkeye series was announced at the last in-person San Diego Comic-Con in summer 2019. Unlike Mjolnir, I was not excited for this show because Hawkeye just had never been my favorite character, and I remember being excited for some of the other things, and I was like, really? Hawkeye is going to get his own show? Okay, I guess it seemed to me like they were just kind of throwing Jeremy Renner a bone for having hung around the MCU as long as he had. But Mjolnir, you mentioned you were actually excited for the show.
Yeah, I was super hyped for it because, like I said, Hawkeye's one of my probably top 5 favorite superheroes, and I and other Hawkeye fans have felt he's been done dirty by the MCU, especially, and even in the first Avengers movie, he's not super well portrayed. It's partly because of the way they use him. He's literally being mind controlled for most of the movie, so you don't really get to see a lot of him as a person. But it was disappointing, and they later on in some of the later Avengers movies, they tried to inject some of his like very well-known sass into things and tried to make him feel a little bit more like his comic book counterparts, but they never really had room for him. And it was one of those things where I think he and Black Widow were the only ones who didn't have their own kind of solo thing. And so I just always felt that Hawkeye wasn't getting the attention he deserved, pretty much, because he is a very well-written character and a very interesting character when you use him right, because the idea of this person who has this drive and wants to do good and doesn't care about themselves, and so they're just constantly putting themselves in these horrible, dangerous situations where they know that they can't do anywhere near as much as all the other people they work with, but they still do it because at least they can help a little bit. That's really interesting and can be well done. So when they announced all of those shows, I think Hawkeye was the one no, that's a lie, because Loki's my bae. Loki and Hawkeye were the ones I was most excited for sure. And I was really excited for it, especially when people said it would be based on the Life as a Weapon series, because that series is really, really good.
Beeper, based on our previous conversations about the MCU shows, you weren't really aware when they made the announcements, and it was only through our discussions that you actually heard about them?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've been aware of it as a show for at least as long as the other ones. At least as long as Loki. So possibly because Mljonir was very excited about both of them. But I think you specifically gave me the first volume of My Life as a Weapon because of the TV show a while back, because it was originally supposed to come out much earlier than it ended up coming out as well. So I think that's why I read that first issue, and I don't know, it's we'll get into the spoiler verse maybe, and then I'll talk about another reason why I think it worked out well, the timing it had. But for now, yeah, I don't know. I was vaguely aware that there would be a Hawkeye show, and that it would be more going into, I guess, into the character of Hawkeye, which I think, without spoiling any things and without giving necessarily an opinion, this series definitely does explore Hawkeye as a person a lot more, even though it takes a few other turns that are necessary to tie it into the greater MCU, but I don't think help the show in particular. But, it was a good Hawkeye exposition.
Did you like the comic series, the first volume that I gave you to read?
Yes, I did actually. I did quite enjoy My Life as a Weapon too. Yes, yeah.
So it's not just me being biased.
I'm guessing, Tater Tot, you probably only ever heard about the show very recently.
Yeah, this is actually the first of the Marvel TV shows that I've watched. Like, I haven't seen WandaVision or Loki or the other ones.
Snowy Owl.
Snowy Owl. Is that the only other one?
And What If?
Oh, What If, yeah. Yeah, this is actually the first one I've watched. Not for lack of interest, just lack of interest. Yeah, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a good TV show, but I feel like we get to our opinions later.
Yes, so Beeper, give us the Blu-ray case description that possibly comes for Disney Plus original shows. I'm not sure if they actually released them on home video, but give us the Blu-ray case description for Hawkeye.
So Kate is helping you with an Avengers level threat?
He's my partner.
It's kind of a stretch.
This Thanksgiving comes the 6-part Marvel event you can't miss.
You want to be a superhero? You put your life in danger.
There's also the cool costumes, some trick arrows. Some people have actually called me the world's greatest archer.
Are you one of those people?
Marvel Studios Hawkeye, streaming November 24th, only on Disney Plus.
In a world where New York has been destroyed, the blip happened, and, well, the MCU happened, we come back to New York, where a young loner shooting arrows is trying to figure out crime, and then she meets Clint Barton, who's kind of super jaded, and suddenly we have I'll Be Home for Christmas, the shooting arrow version with New York Mafia.
Oh, man.
That's without going into the spoilers, but I think that's still it's a good idea.
Yeah, this is very much.
Maybe I should mention that, like, part of the central plot is also Hawkeye trying to get rid of the past of Ronan from
Yes.
Endgame.
So we'll talk spoilers about things that happen in this show in the spoilerverse, but we're in terms of anything that's come before, like Avengers Endgame, full spoilers for that because it's impossible to talk about the plot of this show without spoiling Endgame. So if you haven't seen Avengers Endgame, that's on you. But this is, as our podcast defines it, a C-type Christmas story. It is a story that really has nothing actually plot-wise related to Christmas, but it's set during Christmas. And that did a lot to get me excited because this wasn't on my most anticipated list, but the fact that they were choosing to set it over Christmas, being the Christmas freak that I am, that actually got me kind of excited.
Yeah, it was very Christmas themed. I was not expecting that, especially when it was first announced and everything. There was nothing in my brain where it's like, they're doing a Hawkeye story. It'll definitely revolve heavily around Christmas.
Now you haven't, Tater Tot, you haven't seen the other shows, but I would like your guys' opinion for those who have seen them. If this one felt a lot more like Falcon the Winter Soldier, or Snow Owl as we call it, than either WandaVision or Loki. And I say that because what it does is it takes characters we've seen in the movies before who have been in supporting roles, and it basically asks the question, what does everyday life look for them in a post-blip world?
Yes and no. I still... there definitely is some of that. They're still not using it to its full potential, I think, but there are a few instances in this show that talk about it, but I feel like it's less about the main character. But it does definitely kind of show what the post-blip world is. But I honestly feel like this show was doing more to set up other franchises than Snowy Owl. The only thing that Snowy Owl really set up was the next Captain America. Well, okay,
which had been set up at the end of Endgame anyway.
Yeah, maybe it does a few other small things, but I feel like this show definitely, even though it is kind of an up close and personal story about what were minor or side characters, it does still feel a little bit more like it's setting up other franchises that are coming up. Maybe not to the exact same extent as Loki, but also in a less clumsy way than Loki did. So I'm kind of okay with it. I think everything this series was kind of setting up and working towards is more exciting to me than, hey, look, they're trying to do time travel in alternate dimensions in the fifth way so far. Well, no, the fifth way would be the Spider-Man movie, but it's less about setting up big ideas and something cosmic that may or may not have any internal coherence with the rest of the MCU, but rather about setting up stories and characters that might actually get, good TV shows that are character driven like this one. And I think that's on the whole more exciting for Marvel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely, like Falcon and Winter Soldier, it felt more grounded than WandaVision and Loki and What If, obviously. It felt more like day in the life of than Loki, for sure. Because I think Falcon and Winter Soldier, some of the strongest stuff in it was the more day in the life of type stuff, where it was just kind of showing these guys trying their best and kind of showing them growing in their relationship with each other and their relationship with the world, and trying to figure out how to be the type of heroes that they wanted to be. And that was some of the stuff that was stronger in Falcon Winter Soldier, I felt. And I felt similar vibes in this, for sure. But I feel like it's kind of interesting because I do feel like I liked the overall kind of what the main plot and storyline was better in Hawkeye than what the main plot storyline was in Falcon and Winter Soldier. But Hawkeye focused less on it. There's so much going on in Hawkeye. I really liked most of the people in it, but it felt really crowded. Whereas Falcon and Winter Soldier was better, I think, at focusing mostly on just Bucky and Sam.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on like the character growth of it all, and I think that's what really captivated me in this show, because in the content I consume, books I read, shows I watch, whatever, I do want to care about the characters and like actually like be either rooting for them or like, you know, hoping they go to jail. Which I felt was really done effectively in this TV show. That like I cared about Hawkeye, I cared about the other characters. I'm really bad at remembering character names. I apologize. Like I cared about them all and wanted them to like interact with each other and see how they would, kind of conflict or get along as the different scenarios came up, which I thought was a really cool thing.
Yeah, I agree that I think the most important thing any medium, any content can do is like have really strong characters and strong character development. That's why I like the MCU so much, and it's like pretty much my main fandom, because I really liked that it was like this series of movies that's basically like a TV show where you get to follow these people and watch their relationships develop and watch like them develop as a person and change. And I always thought that was really cool, and some of these shows are doing it better than others. Some of these shows the characters feel like a completely different character than the movies. Loki. and and that sucks, because I want to see, because I love TV shows for that character development, and that's what I want to see. That's what I think what I think will make these TV shows worth it, like for them to keep doing and will make me keep watching them, is them focusing on the characters and giving you this great character development that they just wouldn't have time for in a movie. And I get that that's how movies work. So like that's the point of a TV show. So like stop like having the last episode be this big like massive fight that doesn't really mean anything and is boring for your last episode. Like it's not a movie. It doesn't have to have that big movie climactic ending. Like focus on the characters more.
I will say, like, honestly, if we're comparing it to something, I think it's a more useful or appropriate even way. It would be more appropriate to compare it to Arrow, actually, because it definitely feels like it's trying to to bring in other things that could have a lot of spin-offs and like kind of testing the waters for that, to work out. And I think it did that pretty well. And like, it definitely had like, obviously not exactly the same feel because it is part of the MCU. It's not completely new, but it did feel a bit more like a setup for like an actual universe, like of personal stories rather than just a bunch of movies that happen in a shared consciousness.
Now, I've never read My Life as a Weapon, but you hang around the comic book world long enough and you hear about things. And certainly when people talk about comic book Hawkeye, you hear people talk about Matt Fraction and David Aja's story, My Life as a Weapon. And I thought it was very interesting that they were going to attempt to try and adapt My Life as a Weapon for the series, in light of the fact that, as you pointed out, Mjolnir, the movie MCU version of Hawkeye is so very different from the version that's in the comics. And without spoiling anything, it really isn't an adaptation of that. It's kind of in the same way that like the Civil War comic book provided the blueprint for the Civil War movie. They basically tried to find a way to smush the MCU Hawkeye into that story. It's like Tater Tot, for example. He, in the comic, he's a loner, he's a bachelor, so he just lives in New York in an apartment with a dog. And they created a circumstance in the movie, or the show rather, for the movie version to actually be living in New York without his family around.
I do think that it's, I don't know. I think this is a better adaptation and trying to reconcile what's happening definitely than Civil War was. Like, look, Civil War was absolutely nothing like the comic and was still a good movie, but yeah, it wasn't one of my favorite movies, but it worked and it wasn't. But like, this is this has a lot more direct elements from My Life as a Weapon than Civil War had from the from the comic. And maybe it's because it's a TV show versus a movie, but it did feel like it felt, I think, less like trying to smush something iconic and more like trying to adapt something iconic with what already exists.
It had very heavy, like, inspired by vibes, you know? Like, there's a lot of recognizable elements, and I think they kind of did the best they could with the way they had made Hawkeye in this universe to capture kind of the feel and themes from the original comic book, but it's still very, very different.
Yeah, nobody's arguing it's different. I just think it's a better adaptation of the material and reconciling of the MCU with a comic than Civil War was.
And I'm guessing, Tater Tot, since you like the fact that he's a family man in the movies, you probably wouldn't have wanted to see the version where he's just this sad bachelor.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't have wanted to see that. I mean, maybe if I had never known the Hawkeye that is in the MCU movies, I would have been fine with him being the bachelor living in New York all alone and sad with his dog. But I loved I guess that's spoilers actually, is the subplot between him and his family.
That's fine. That's, that's vague enough.
Vague enough.
His family's involved. That's in the trailer. It's fine.
Okay, great.
Plus, I gave in the Blu-ray description that it turns into I'll Be Home for Christmas.
I haven't seen that movie.
What? Jonathan Taylor Thomas. He's like stuck in a Santa suit and he has to get home to his family for Christmas.
I also haven't seen that movie, but I figured out the plot from the title.
It's not subtle.
Yeah, I could have done a little bit better on my deductive reasoning.
Now, listeners of this show know I love trying to sort out the timeline of these things. And it's kind of confusing as to figuring out when this show takes... I mean, obviously it's set during Christmas, but in terms of how it fits in with everything else that's post-Endgame. So here's my thinking, and everyone can try and fact check me here. So we know that Spider-Man Far From Home takes place 8 months after the blip. That's when they go on their summer trip to Europe. We know that Falcon the Winter Soldier is set 6 months after the blip. We know WandaVision was a month after the blip. We don't know currently, they haven't confirmed in any timeline documents the exact date when the blip happened. But we can infer or presume that if indeed it is June, when they're going off on summer vacation in Far From Home, that the blip would have been 8 months before that, which would lead us to the blip happening sometime in the fall. And then in Spider-Man No Way Home, it takes place right after Far From Home, and it kind of goes over a period of months and ends with Christmas. So people were thinking that the Christmas you see in No Way Home is the same Christmas you see in Hawkeye. But I think that the Hawkeye Christmas is actually a year before No Way Home. And that it's actually it's 2 months or a shorter period of time after the blip has happened.
Because in Hawkeye, at some point, someone mentions that the Statue of Liberty is going to have the Captain America shield added to it, and that's a big set piece for Spider-Man No Way Home.
It could still be happening at the same time.
They're both in New York. It would have come up, if that really intense media frenzy around Peter Parker was going on at the same time, and all the thing with those villains and stuff, I don't know, I feel like there would be more crossover.
You would hope if they were thinking these things through.
Yeah, but I don't think they did fully. Because
spoilers for Spider-Man.
Here's the thing, though. I mean, okay, that would definitely explain why the Avengers musical is as bad as it is in the show. But
terrible.
Then again, it
As someone who loves musicals, I feel misrepresented. I swear musicals are normally better than that.
But here's but I also don't think it's that soon afterwards for a few reasons. Number one, Ant-Man is fully recognized and in the musical, and that seems weird because not just because of like the pointed out he wasn't there, but like Ant-Man hasn't really done anything recognizable yet, or that anybody cares about. I mean, I guess he was in Civil War, but that's not much. So I don't think that
And
it
the
would
public
be
doesn't know about that.
exactly. So like that seems a little weird. I feel like it would have taken some time for him to come into it. Also, I'm pretty sure there are signs for the musical in No Way Home.
Oh,
Well, it could be still playing a year later.
Are you?
Yeah,
You've
maybe it's a
seen
big box
that was
office
not
smash.
playing a year. That was not on for more than a year.
There are much better Broadway musicals that have closed much sooner than that.
Like
Broadway is like it's huge to be on Broadway. You have to like the novelty of it being about the Avengers would have worn off, and then like it wouldn't have been able to coast on the story clearly like for a year's worth of performances.
But I mean, like Lion King is still on Broadway, and I mean it is a very beautiful musical and a great story, but it does also have just the Disney sparkle to it, which I think keeps the long lasting going, right? People are going to go and see Lion King because it's easy access to musicals. So maybe it's also the same thing for the superhero.
I mean, I would argue too, like post blip, people probably just want something good or something like oh, like this will warm me or make me feel better about how terrible everything is.
Post blip, I wouldn't want to go to a musical about superheroes, like because the superheroes were very involved with the blip. I would want to go to a musical about literally anything else.
like I think
and also Lion King is known for like the spectacle and the costumes and the atmosphere. That musical was not that. Those were
the costumes were absolute trash.
Abhorrent. Like the costumes were not Broadway level. Those were like High School Musical level.
I had better costumes in my High School Musicals.
Like unless it was like something like Hamilton. What? That's not even true because Hamilton does have good costumes. But like if like the theme was like, oh, it's a retelling of the superheroes, but like as high schoolers, so it's like there was part of the theme was to make it look low budget. That would be the only way something would look like that on Broadway.
Even there, the
I think
lighting
we're tangenting it here a little too much, but
okay, yes, but
Sorry,
Can we just talk about musicals instead?
I have something else to bring up though, and here's the thing. I think that we are going to have a better idea once some of the spin-off shows from it are going to be a thing. But here's the other thing. If the blip ended in fall, right? That means that, the distance between Ronan's actions before this show happens and this show seemed to have been more than a year. And if this happened post-blip, then it's right after Endgame, which is when he was active.
That's true.
Like literally weeks after where we saw him. And it feels like there's more of a distance between, Clint being Ronan in Endgame and Clint here. Not to mention how much his hair has grown. That's an actual continuity fact.
Oh, that is a good point. I didn't think about the hair.
But it does seem weird that, if it was the same Christmas, clearly you should be seeing, some Spider-Man stuff happening, but it didn't.
Yeah, so anyway, until there's something more official, we won't know, but it's just sort of fun to, speculate about. I think the only other thing we can talk about that isn't really a spoiler is just that Kate Bishop is in this show, and I've heard of Kate Bishop before because she's kind of one of those like spunky, sarcastic comic book characters people seem to really love. She was originally introduced as Hawkeye during a period in the comics when Clint Barton was dead, so the mantle was free. But then they've run into the problem they have with other characters that once they brought Clint Barton back from the dead, it's like, well, we also like her, so I guess they're both Hawkeye now.
Legacy
it was
characters.
Yeah, legacy characters, exactly. So I was really psyched when I heard Haley Steinfeld was playing her, because I just, from what I've seen her, and she's very charismatic, and she seemed like a good fit for the part.
And she's definitely a lot more of the... I know we've been through this, but she is more of the Green Arrow in the sense, like, you know, she did have the means to train herself and to make a difference. And I, you know, once again, we briefly talked about this during Snowy Owl, and when we talked about repercussions of Black Widow, but Young Avengers, question mark?
They must be working towards Young Avengers. They've been setting up so many Young Avengers type things. I swear to God, if they don't do Young Avengers, I will riot.
Jam 2.
So she's great. We can all agree Kate Bishop's great in the show. Yes?
Yes.
Yeah, she's good. I was a little disconcerted by some of her characterization at first, because I'm in the comics, and when she interacts with Clint, she's normally a lot more capable of a person. In My Life as a Weapon, that's kind of part of the joke. She's a big character in that, and Clint is this pathetic, like, you know, late 30s man who's always, like, has 3 broken bones and is barely holding it together in his crappy apartment, and then, like, this, you know, young, capable, like, smart girl comes in and is like, get up, it's like noon, you know, make yourself breakfast, that type of stuff. And so it was kind of interesting to see the role switched a bit in this, but I understand it's like, they turned it into her origin story, so, like, they had to have her start on the off foot, and I think you can definitely see that she's going to become a lot more capable later on. Like, she does have the chops for it.
All right, it's time to dive into that good old juicy spoilerverse. So, if you have not watched Hawkeye and you don't want to get spoiled for things that happen in Hawkeye, there'll be a time code in the description you can use to skip around, because we're now inside the spoilerverse. So, they continue the story from the Black Widow movie here. And when we watched Black Widow, you were like, "Oh, why are they going to do that?" I remember you, Beeper, you were kind of annoyed that they included that post-credit scene setting up Yelena's presence here. So I wanted to ask, now that we've seen her role in Hawkeye, has your opinion changed at all?
No, it was really... Look, it was a really dumb plot line. It was one of the least sensical ones in the show, and I didn't like it. That being said, I liked Yelena. I liked the fact that she was in the show. Everything about her interactions with Clint was bad. Her interactions with Kate Bishop were amazing, but still kind of in the context didn't make a whole lot of sense. Like, I don't know, is she really that easy to influence and that easy to, like, manipulate? It seemed a little bit out of character, both for who she is, but also for, like, what was set up. Now, I will say, the fact that she was in the blip did help with that suspension of disbelief, and I think that was good, because that wasn't touched on in the post-credit. And I think that also her presence and her experience with how it happened, not just visually, it was stunning visually, but, like, generally is probably the best kind of thought-provoking thing. Unfortunately, it also provoked the thought of how many people were blipped in the washroom, but, you know, she, like, I'm still annoyed at the way her character acted and was handled, and the role she had with Clint, but I wasn't annoyed at her being in the show.
Oh, she was, like, one of the best parts of the show. I loved her so much. I do agree that I think the way they resolved the thing with Clint was kind of weak. I liked the idea of it. I could see what they're trying to do with it. I think they needed another couple drafts to really make it work. It was kind of...
Or an extra episode in the show.
Yeah, that's in general, this show, like, I really liked it, and I liked a lot of the characters in it, but it felt really crowded, and frankly, about halfway through, as a huge Clint Barton fan, I was a little frustrated at how much like airtime was being devoted to anyone but Clint Barton. And I understand him sharing it with Kate, and that even it's called Hawkeye, but they're both Hawkeye, so it's fine. It's not false advertising, like whatever. They're co-leads. I get that, but then you also have the thing going on with Maya. You also have the thing going on with God. I forgot her name. We were just talking about her.
Yelena.
We also have the thing going on with Yelena, right? We then Kingpin shows up. Like,
Yes.
out of nowhere.
Yeah, but that
who I loved him, but like some of the there was a lot of threads going all over the place, and then they also they shoved in those LARPers as like characters, that recurring characters that we were supposed to be more attached to as well, and they explored Jacques fairly well over the thing, and it just there were so many characters and plot threads going on, and I understand that they're trying to like may be like, oh, this is coming up in the next show, but I felt it was at the detriment of the actual show we were watching sometimes, that too much time was being devoted, and they needed to cut it. They needed more episodes, or needed to cut at least one of those threads from the show to make it more focused and coherent.
Now, Tater Tot, were you even aware that there's going to be spin-offs made from this? Like, did it seem apparent when you were watching it?
I mean, did I know? Absolutely not. But was it apparent that there would be spin-offs? I think it was safe to assume that what's-her-face, girl Hawkeye,
Kate Bishop.
Thank you. Kate would get her own show. I'm assuming that's what one of the spin-offs is going to be.
Not yet, anyway.
Oh, well, shoot.
They're certainly setting her up to be in more things.
Yeah.
But yeah, at this point, she doesn't have her own thing yet.
Oh, well, I thought that was one of the for sure setups. But I could also see Yelena having her own spin-off show as well.
She also doesn't have the only
Who are the people who have spin-offs then?
The only confirmed spin-off from this at this point is Echo, which is Maya's character.
Okay.
But
that's interesting.
If you take also into consideration the fact that Matt Murdock shows up in No Way Home, spoiler for No Way Home, but people knew about this and we talked about it in the last episode, like, it did also, like, I don't know, it is setting up a lot more of like the whole New York crime scene as being part of the MCU, which I think is exciting. And actually, between those two cameos, made me watch most of the first season of Daredevil now. So we'll see how that
Matt
goes.
Murdock's going to be in the She-Hulk show that he's been confirmed because she's
She-Hulk.
He's in the She-Hulk show. I've heard he might be in the Moon Knight show that comes out this year.
That would make sense.
I've heard he and the other Daredevil characters and Kingpin might all be in the Echo show. So you're right. There is a lot of seeds that are planted here because Yelena will definitely I would hope so. She's so good in the role. And they have a new Black Widow. Kate will definitely appear in things again. Echo. So.
And Yelena can either be there as a Young Avenger or as a Dark Avenger. Like, she has been set up for both.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Yeah, kind of. They haven't. I feel like they haven't quite decided where they're going with their character yet. I hope they do more of what they did in this show, which is like this badass assassin who's very casual about the whole thing because she just grew up in this world of violence, and so that's normal to her, and she's just kind of like going along, just trying to have a good time while dealing with the fact that she was raised horribly. And I just think that's really fun. I think she's a really fun character, and her way of coping with her childhood is so different from Natasha's way, and I think that's really interesting to explore. I never really vibed with Natasha Romanoff much as a character. Like, just personally, she wasn't one of my favorites. And I really like Yelena's maybe more bombastic way of showing her trauma.
Well, I think there's real potential here with the way that Kate Bishop and Yelena play against each other in this, for them to be in their own like Hawkeye and Black Widow show.
Yeah, it's the second generation, but the chemistry still works.
Yeah. I think I think that would be great as a duo thing. I also think if they do the Young Avengers, I think Yelena's Black Widow is not like traditionally a part of the Young Avengers, but I think she could very easily be folded into like a Young Avengers team and be one of them. And I think she would bounce off all the others quite well because they have set up quite a few other characters.
And I
Basically,
mean,
every show so far has set up has had at least one character appear on screen in like their civilian mode that is a character from this Young Avengers comic that we keep talking about.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
the seeds are there.
Yeah.
And
it's a bit of a
also,
possibility.
I think it's like it would be interesting too, because canonically in the MCU, the first two members of the Avengers Initiative were Black Widow and Hawkeye, right? So it would be interesting for that to be happening again.
They weren't original members. Originally, it was Scarlet Witch and Pietro.
I mean, in the MCU.
Or actually, no, wait. What am I saying?
Yeah, no, in the MCU, they were the first ones to be part of the Avengers Initiative.
Ones. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No. But yeah. Sorry.
You were talking about Young Avengers.
Yeah.
I was talking about Young Avengers, and then I thought you were talking about the comic book origins for a sec. Sorry, no. Which is that because Hawkeye and Black Widow were not part of the like original lineup. They joined a little while later after Pietro quit because of mutant racism. But yeah, in the MCU they are founding members, so it makes sense.
So here's a question: should Jeremy Renner come back? Like, is he done now? Like, is there anything more that he can do as the character with like knowing all the pieces that are in play?
I mean, I think it's interesting because like they kind of set up the thing with his wife being a shield, like being a shield agent, and specifically
Bobby Moore,
yeah.
Agent 19, also known as Mockingbird in the comics. He was married to her for a while, then I think they got divorced, but then they've had an on again, off again thing for a while. And in the comics, she was a Skrull. It turned out she was a Skrull and had been a Skrull for a while. Like that, and Bobby had been like in space, like in cryosleep or whatever, for like a really long time.
I don't think they're gonna do that though.
I don't know, but they're setting up Skrull stuff, so maybe the reason that they made this weird focus on his wife right at the end and set up the Agent 19 thing, maybe it'll turn out his wife is a Skrull. Who knows?
If she turns out to be a Skrull, I will be devastated. I love the relationship.
Skrulls can be good.
I mean, it would make Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. fans sad because Bobby Morse is a character in that show played by a different actress. So if it is true that she's Mockingbird, then it will finally shut up all those Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. fans to say, no, you are not canon. They have overwritten your canon.
But I thought they officially weren't canon. I thought they haven't been canon for a while.
They've never said officially that they aren't. I think everyone just sort of understands it, but there's still this like hardcore little fan base of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is like, no, it still works. It still works.
I mean, yeah, but what I was gonna say is like they kind of close that storyline by having him retrieve the watch, I feel. So I think Jeremy Renner is going to definitely cameo in some things. Whether or not he's ever a main character or a focus, I don't think so. Like he might be like in flashbacks, show up in cameos, maybe play a mentor for Kate Bishop more, but honestly, I think they're pretty much done with him.
They did do a very good job of really focusing on, like, look at this sad old man with, like, frozen peas on his face who really needs to stop this or he's going to get himself killed. Like, they did they were very specific about focusing on some of that stuff in the show. So I feel like, this is a visual medium. I feel like visually they were communicating that, like, we're, like, at least in the process of retiring this character.
Would you be sad, Tater Tot, if they just retired Jeremy Renner at this point?
I mean, yeah, but they also retired Captain America, and he's my favorite. Like,
well, there's still a Captain America, just not Steve Rogers.
Steve Rogers will always be Captain America in my heart. Like, if it makes sense for them to retire Jeremy Renner, because he is kind of, unless I'm missing someone, he's the last kind of holdover from the original Avengers squad, And so, like, as they're moving forward into this phase,
We're in 4, but 5 is coming soon.
yeah, phase 5 of the MCU, it seems like they're retiring all of the old guys and moving forward into the new kids on the block, you know?
Yeah, I mean, Thor's still around because he has another movie coming out.
But
which
Thor's in
introduced-
space with the Guardians right now.
Yeah, he's in
not on
space.
Earth.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Hulk is also around, but he's never been a
Hulk
main
could
character
also
'cause
be in
they don't
space
have
very
the rights to
quickly.
solo Hulk movies.
Right.
Which there is maybe in She-Hulk they will do like a kind of retiring Bruce more like officially thing.
Oh yeah, they're just killing it, or not killing, but they're finding ways to let these actors move on to other
Yeah,
projects.
let
They
them
could
live their
just-
lives.
They could just pretend that Planet Hulk is going to be happening somewhere else and send him off to space. Like, it wouldn't be the end of the world.
When
And then
in
they
doubt,
could
send them off
make
to
a Planet
space.
Hulk movie at some point, maybe.
So we mentioned that Kingpin was in this. I saw Spider-Man: Far From Home right after watching the 5th episode, which confirms that Kingpin was going to be in the last episode of Hawkeye. So I go straight from, oh, they're going to bring back the guy from the Netflix show to play Kingpin, and I'd heard that as a rumor like 6 months ago, but I didn't want to get my hopes up. I'm like, oh, that'd be amazing if it's true, but the idea of them actually bringing back actors from those Marvel Netflix shows to play the parts again seemed like pretty out there. But then finally that reveal came in. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. And then I'd also heard a rumor that Charlie Cox was going to be in Spider-Man. I was like, oh, that would be amazing, but I don't want to get my hopes up. And sure enough, both things have happened now. I really hope he's not dead. If they brought him back just to kill him in one episode, I will be very unhappy.
That seems very unlikely. I'm very relieved that when they cast these actors, they were in fact the real characters we were hoping they would be, and not a Ralph Boner situation again. Because that was a very disappointing part of WandaVision. I'm glad they're like doing stunt casting, but like actually following through on it now.
I think the other thing, look, can Kingpin be killed by one measly bullet? There was only one gunshot. You'd think if she would, if she really killed him, she either shot him through the face, which Kingpin has canonically survived before. I mean, specifically being shot by Echo, I think, right?
In the comics,
I'm pretty sure
so.
there is an instance that Echo shoots him in the face and he survives. So, like, he might lose an eye.
It's Kingpin. They would not have shot him off screen. Like, if they were killing him, they would show it. That's my reasoning.
Yeah, that's what I thought as well, was just that, like, they wouldn't cut away from this huge standoff between Maya and Kingpin just to hear a shot ring out across New York City, right? If the Kingpin is actually going to die, he's going to do it on screen. It wouldn't be something that happens off screen.
Look, I haven't seen all of the show yet for Hawkeye, but like, not for Hawkeye, sorry, for Daredevil, but it seems like there's an upgrade in the amount of damage he can take from the show to the movie, which, maybe it's just that he never gets a fight that pushes him that far in the show, but like he was right beside an explosion and he walked away after like being knocked out for a minute.
Well, this raises a
Feels
question.
like a gunshot, a single bullet, especially from a medium caliber gun, would not finish him.
Well, and this is the thing I don't know is this another situation like recasting J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson? We don't know for sure if the Marvel Netflix shows actually take place in the MCU. It could easily be a situation like the Marvel television Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. shows where it's like, it's one of the worlds in the multiverse and it's something very similar, but it's not exactly the same, because you're right. I've seen all 3 seasons of the Daredevil show. He never portrays, like, he's always perceived as being strong and having a huge temper, but he never seems to have like super strength or the levels of like in Hawkeye, he looks and he behaves and he recovers in the way that comic book Kingpin does. So we don't know if this version is the exact same one from the series that came before, or if it's like a variant type thing where this is the real Kingpin and what you saw on Netflix was actually just a variant.
Yeah, the Netflix shows were they were a lot more grounded than the MCU until they weren't, because there's the whole Dragon Bones in New York thing. But you know, and at least especially at the beginning, it was very grounded and was very like intertwined kind of with the movie continuity. Like they clearly like established things that like, oh, this is supposed to be in continuity, and then like I feel like as the shows progressed and they started to have their own little like mini universe within just the Netflix shows, they started being less grounded, and they also started to be a lot more tenuously linked to the MCU. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's something like there's like basic kind of character or story beats, you know, that are the same. They're like, oh, like something along those lines seems to have happened in this world, but the shows that we saw were like an alternate universe or something. Jacques was a treasure. I loved him. He was. Thought it was a fun misdirect. It's a very. I thought it was a good way to tell the super fans and the comic book fans that, see, you don't know everything. Stop assuming just because this is a comic book character whose name we took that you know what's going to happen, because he is the swordsman in the comics. He is the guy who trained Clint Barton in the circus and is a villain, and there's a lot of like personal history between those two. Clearly none of that exists here, but they took that kind of basic idea of a sword dude and they made him this fun eccentric guy who was like a believable, like once you find out that he was a red herring, he was like a believable red herring, like because he's just like a weirdo who doesn't understand how the world works, and that's why he was suspicious, you know. And the way they really like, then they didn't just throw him away after the red herring was revealed. They kept him around and were like, actually, he's helping and he's having a blast. And I thought that was so fun and unique and a really great way to handle a red herring, to be like, no, this is a character we put thought into. We just didn't just throw a random fake bad guy at you to trick you. We made a real fleshed out character and kept him around.
Yeah, Jacques was a lot of fun. Or Jack, whatever. I still didn't believe that he was a good guy, even when he was fighting with his sword against the bad guys. Like, that's how like pulled in I was to that. I was like, I still don't trust you. I still don't think that you're like on the. I think I've finally fallen on the side of, yeah, you're a good guy. But he was a super fun little addition. Totally fell for the red herring, and like I love that. I love a good red herring in a story. Someone that I can
a Snape, if you will.
A what?
A Snape.
A Snape, yes. Someone that I can throw all my weight behind and hating, and then it's just like, oh wait, no, I made a mistake. Everything's wrong.
And it was great because it's not like one of those things where they're lying to the audience and they're like, haha, you're so dumb for falling for this thing when like we didn't give you all the information or whatever. Because it is like, it feels very real that like Kate is a very biased character who's like, get away from my mom. I'm not ready for a new dad. And so you're experiencing him through her eyes, and it makes all his eccentricities seem like malicious. But when it turns out that he's just a guy, you're not like mad at the show for like misleading you, because like it makes perfect sense. I thought that was very well handled and is very easy to mishandle.
My last spoiler thing: how did S.H.I.E.L.D. get Pym arrowheads? We can have a discussion about that at another time, but that is weird.
So coming around to final thoughts, for me at least, I think Hawkeye is actually the series that I've enjoyed the most out of the Disney Plus Marvel shows, which I'm shocked by because it was definitely not the one I was most excited for. It's just the one that I guess I've had the fewest issues with, and I really enjoyed it from start to finish. And I appreciate how they found a way to have a deaf character be very prominent in this show. They had a deaf character in Eternals as well, but it just, for some reason, it worked better here in Hawkeye. And I'm excited for where these characters go next. So,
all right, final thoughts. I think I probably agree with you, Average Joe. I think this is it's not the series I had the most fun watching. That would still be Snowy Owl, but I think that it definitely had less issues than a lot of other ones and was a good change of pace of not taking itself too seriously. And I think also in a similar way that I think it did a good balance of being a good comic book show in the same way that like Spider-Man No Way Home or the Sam Raimi movies managed to feel like comic booky but still work. I feel like this show kind of did that. It had a lot in it and it was kind of very in a style of a comic book, but it still worked.
Yeah, like with the Tracksuit Mafia and with thing, they took those very silly elements and they made them just realistic enough to work, but they kept some of the silliness, which is great because that's what I want in my comic books. I want character development, but also silly shenanigans. I have my thoughts now. Okay, so the highs were higher in some of the other shows, I think, like WandaVision. I think some of the highs were really, really high and good and great. But Hawkeye never drops the ball. Like, I feel like every one of these shows so far, there's been some really big, at least one really big misstep that has been made it hard to look back on the thing as a whole and be like, yeah, that was just undeniably good. And I think Hawkeye is not as flashy as some of these other ones, but I think it's very competently made, which isn't like people underestimate competence. Competence is very important. And it's all done very well. And even though I feel it's a little crowded, it's not like a huge massive misstep type of crowded like has happened in things before. So I really liked it, and I think it's super solid and introduces a lot of new characters and explores pre-existing characters in good ways.
Yeah, as this was the only MCU Disney Plus TV show I've watched, it was definitely my favorite. But no, like I truly enjoyed it, and I know you've warned me that, or AJ, you've warned me that the other shows aren't the same, and as we've had in this conversation as well. But it does make me kind of more open to watching the rest of the shows. I enjoyed, that I was captivated by the characters. I wanted to see how they would all interact and how things would turn out at the end. Like, it made me actually excited to watch an episode every week. And yeah, which is hard for me to do. I'm not like a huge TV watcher, so the fact that I was like excited to watch a TV show said a lot. And yeah, I really enjoyed the Kate Bishop Hawkeye collaboration, partnership, not a partnership aspect of it.
So Bat Cookie wise, this show is pretty on target for me.
Huh.
So I'm gonna give it a 3.4 out of 4 Bat Cookies.
I'm going to give it a 3.4, 3.3. Like, I don't remember what I gave the other shows, but like it, you know what, 3.5. It did get me excited about a few things, so yeah, it was solid.
3 and a bit, like maybe 3.2, I guess. Yeah, it wasn't quite what I was expecting, but I wasn't disappointed either, which is impressive.
And I think I would give it a 3.5. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I look forward to every episode and would possibly consider watch again.
I'll write that down for future reference. So Hawkeye, all 6 episodes are now available to watch on Disney Plus. That's really the only way to watch it, folks. And again, I don't know if these shows ever get put on physical media, so check it on Disney Plus. This is normally when we go inside the bat jar to look at our mail, but we are off site. I did not bring the bat jar with me, so and we don't have any mail anyway, so it's kind of a moot point.
If you want to reach the show, you can send us an email at
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
or you can tweet us at
The Bat Cookie Jar.
You can find the Bat Jar Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, because we got a channel. Share our posts on Facebook, write reviews, give our shows a rating. This will help all people join us inside the Bat Jar, and we appreciate it dearly.
And in terms of next week, we're actually going to celebrate the new year by just taking a week off. So we won't have a new episode on Monday, January 10th. We'll come back on Monday, January 17th.
When we will both be old men.
When we will both be old men. That's right. Now, Beeper, it has been tradition on this show to do an episode reviewing all the comic book films released in the calendar year. We decided not to do that for 2020 because there were only like a handful of them that actually ended up getting a theatrical release as a result of the pandemic. But between 2020 and 2021, I think there's been enough of them that we can actually do a full-length comic book films of 2020 and 2021 episode. So when we come back,
films of the pandemic.
Yeah. So far anyway. So when we come back in 2 weeks, that'll be our episode talking about all the comic book films that have been released in theaters in 2020 and 2021. Which means that this episode is wrapping up. And so we want to, of course, thank Mljonir for coming back and being part of our conversation, and Jam as well for chiming in once in a while there.
There she is.
Yeah, she has lots to say. It was super fun to join in again. There's been a couple episodes that I've kind of wanted to join in on, but just things have happened. I've been too tired to talk or whatever, and been like, ugh, that's
Fair.
fine. I don't need to know my thoughts on Loki that bad. It was nice to get to chime in about MCU because I always have lots of opinions.
And of course, we thank Tater Tot for joining us this week on the show.
My pleasure.
You're welcome back anytime.
Sounds good.
And Beeper, I guess, yeah, I love you too. Just in case I don't want you to feel unacknowledged.
Oh, it doesn't matter. You can't get rid of me now.
Well, come back to the Bachelor Podcast in 2 weeks when we talk about all the comic book films that have been released in 2020 and 2021. And until that time, I'm Average Joe.
I'm Beef Pork Ribs.
I'm Mljonir. This is Jam. See?
And I'm Tater Tot.
Catch you on the flip side.
I'm old Gandalf.
Toodles!
Ciao.